Good evening. My name is Laura Goldstein, and I am a library assistant at Burbank Public Library. Welcome to this evening's program, Container Gardening for Beginners, featuring Master Gardener Alex Arciniega. Today, Alex will show us how to grow a garden in any space. Before we begin, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items so we can all enjoy this online program. As audience members, you will not be able to speak, but you will see a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Throughout the program, you are welcome to type in your questions, and for Alex to answer. When you leave the program, you will be redirected to an evaluation form, and we would greatly appreciate if you could fill it out to help us improve our programs in the future. We'd like to thank the Friends of the Burbank Public Library for their sponsorship of this program. And now I will turn it over to Master Gardener, Alex Arciniega.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for joining. I am so happy to be here. Thank you, Burbank Public Library, for having me. I'm going to share my screen and start sharing some slides, and I'll be bouncing between a PowerPoint and some demonstrations. So bear with me 1 second. May I get co-host privileges, please? Got it. Awesome. Thank you. All right. So I'm going to talk about container gardening today, all levels. So if you are a beginner, great, welcome. I think sometimes gardening, it's hard to say that you're starting at ground zero. It's so intimidating. So many people know so much about it. And then you could know a lot about one plant and absolutely nothing about another, and that's okay. I give you permission to fail. I've killed so many plants, so let's do this together. My name is Alex Arciniega. I'm a master gardener through the UCA&R program, and it's a volunteer title. We are required to complete continuing education, volunteer a lot of time in our communities, and it's a very multicultural group. So if you're working on a project and you need help, please reach out. We'd be happy to connect you with someone who will fit your needs. I might not be the expert at certain things, but someone can be, and they can help you. All right, so I think I have this vision about this polished garden, and it has these beautiful rustic containers, and it's just so neat, and it's wonderful and beautiful. And I think this is something I would put together for a client. But in reality, like, sometimes my stuff does not look so cute. And it's okay, because sometimes a productive garden might not be the prettiest, and vice versa. And the gardens that you see on TV or on Instagram are so beautifully curated. The Huntington is beautiful. It also has full-time gardeners there. So release some of those expectations. So because it's Earth Week, I really wanted to not just talk about the polished look. I wanted to talk about what we could do with what we have. I find that we're often going out and buying new things when really we could repurpose things that we have around the house. So I had takeout yesterday. So I'm going to wash this, make a hole at the bottom. And then what I'm going to do is fill it up with soil, mix it up with a little bit of peat moss to retain some moisture. And then I'm going to put it out in some indirect sun and grow some tomatillos. So this is one way to repurpose what you have and not feel like you have to either buy a whole plant or not throw this away. So we could use this a few more times while we're growing seeds. Another thing is I like to save these when the gardeners are like working on stuff and they're replacing my neighbor's plants. So in here, I don't know if you could see, but I'm growing some basil in there. So I had some soil left over from another project, and I threw in some basil seeds. And so now these are my starts. The container's not in great shape, but I can transplant this to a raised bed, and then it'll be more cost effective for me. I can reinvigorate the soil by adding a little bit of compost or worm castings, and then add some basil seeds that I just had left over. So just with that in mind, just know that you can save your own seeds. And this is just a leftover toilet paper roll. I folded in the bottom. We can fill this up with soil. We can just label it. This is a great Earth Day project. This is great for kids. And this is a really cost-effective way to get the most bang for your buck when you want to grow a lot of basil, but you don't know if your seeds will take or if they won't take. So reuse. Please, please, please use your resources. We have a great Burbank Backyard Food Growers group. I swear by that group. There are so many knowledgeable people there who are more than willing to share seeds with you and share knowledge, and their time is just so valuable. Join your buy nothing groups. They're wonderful to ask for pots. Sometimes we have too much. We have such an abundance in this community, and it's a great way to rotate things in and out of your house. All right, so where do we start, right? I think the hardest part is like, oh my God, I want to grow tomatoes and I want to grow lavender and I want to grow rosemary and I want all of these things yesterday. But we need to know that gardening takes time. So if you see something at the grocery store, it might not necessarily be the item that's growing here now. So we have to work our way backwards. So if we want winter squash, we need to determine on the seed packet when we can plant it, how long it takes, and kind of just navigate that. So with that said, I know we're calling this class container gardening, and there's a lot of different types of containers. Some of us live in homes, some of us live in apartments. So I think the first step is to determine your location. Where can you leave these containers? Can you leave them on the front porch? Is your space only this big? And then what can you grow there, right? So in order to determine the location, you need to determine how much sun that location gets. So how many hours of direct sun? And we're in zone 10. So it's like, whoa, the sun can get really, really scorching hot. So we have to take into account the direct sun and any bouncing light that is coming off the walls. So it might not just be getting blasted from the sun directly, but also the walls will bounce heat off of that. Now, there's a lot of people who are into indoor plants. You need to find out if the plant's going to require direct light, indirect light, or a lot of shade. So these are all things that you can find out at a nursery. When in doubt, Google. If you are unsure, I find that some websites rank very high, but they're not very knowledgeable. So try to find something that's in Southern California if you're in Southern California, and that website is relevant to your area. All right, and water source. So you need to make sure that you're going to be able to water this plant regularly, because it's really easy. And I'm so guilty of this, saying, oh yeah, I'll hand water that. And you know what? I've lost a couple of trees that way, because it's not so much that you're neglectful. Life just happens. And with COVID, I feel like we're getting in and out of some like crazy scheduling conflicts. So it's good to find out, do you have a hose there? Are you going to use drip irrigation? Are kids there? Are they going to overwater? So it's easy to work with what you have. Just make sure that you're taking inventory of what you're capable of. I'm infamous for kind of trying to do too much and thinking I'm like the super gardener, and really there's only so much you can do, and there's only so much you can grow, and only so much space that you have. So I think it's understanding your limitations. Like, okay, right now, maybe I can only grow cilantro and jalapenos and one tomato plant, and that's okay. So if you become the expert at your space or at one or two plants, then you'll do better next time. I think the biggest challenge is sometimes we overcommit and then we get turned off by gardening. Or then I hear people say, well, I have a black thumb, and that's not the case. You know, you just really need to adjust. Okay, so let me see if there's any questions so far while I'm here. All right, not so far. So I'm going to keep going. All right. For what do you like to, okay, what to grow? This is like such an important question. One thing I want to focus on is gardening should be fun, and it should alleviate stress, and it should also contribute to your overall sense of wellness. and your overall sense of healthy habits. So if you want to grow stuff that's inside the house, great. Like this is a plant, and I'm going to show you. This is a plant that was like a dumpster plant. It only had this little branch. And so what I did is I rooted it in water, and now it's doing okay. It's not great yet, but it's getting there. So this was like a really great find. It was getting thrown out. This pot I got in my local Buy Nothing group, and I just purchased, or I repurposed some soil. So this is what I like to grow inside. Now outside, I showed you guys my basil. I like cooking with basil because it's a good way to make pesto sauce. It's really great for recipes, and it's really tasty for me. I really like it. And then this is something new that I'm trying. It's called Gotu Kola. I think it's used in Sri Lankan recipes. Honestly, I got it because I've never seen it before. It's a cute little plant. It's a tiny little pot. And I think I'm planning on like trying a new recipe with it. So this is my experiment and see how it goes. It's really easy. It grows like an herb. It's wonderful. So these are things I like for different reasons. So my next question is like, can it be grown in a container? I would love to have these beautiful trees inside the house, but sometimes those are only good for like Instagram or like, I don't know, influencers or whatever. But I like to find the right container for the right plant. Often I find that I've killed some plants because I'll find a great deal at IKEA, and let me show you. So this pot is an IKEA pot. Notice how it doesn't have holes on the bottom. So one mistake that I've made in the past is that I've planted a plant directly in here. And what happens is, I don't know if it's really oversaturated, too wet, too dry for the most part. And I've gotten the roots waterlogged. So most plants don't like sitting in mush, right? Unless they're swampy plants, and I've killed plants. So my solution for something like this, where I want a pot that like kind of fits the aesthetic of the house or whatever, and then I just add a plant in here. So this plant, this pot that I'm adding to the bottom has holes. So this will allow drainage. And then what I can do is, for indoor plants, what I like to do is feed them from the bottom. So I add water, and we can reuse my container from last night. So I added water to here. I'm letting the roots soak it up, and then I'm going to let it kind of run through. I'll probably add more water, let it dry out, and then put it back. So that's an easy way to water that won't oversaturate it. So most things can be grown in a container. I've seen really cool things done with like succulents where people add them to tin aluminum cans, and they're like kitschy, and they have these really cool designs and very like cool cultural cooking brands. So that's really great. You can do that with succulents. You can do that with herbs. It's also a really great way to repurpose trash, and a really great gift to give a neighbor or a friend. I find when I make new friends, I like to give them small little tokens of appreciation or affection, and plants are a great way to kind of like tell someone that you care, right? And it takes a little bit of care so they know you like put thought into it. So, all right, this is my crazy stuff. I love to name my plants. I love to tell them stories. Here's why. If you're talking to your plants and telling them stories, you're forced to look at them. And then you're able to look at them and say, oh man, you have aphids. I got to take care of you. Or, oh, you look like you're having a hard time. Let me help. So it's good to just kind of pay attention. Just because they're doing well, like 1 week doesn't mean that like the temperature isn't going to change. So make sure you like commit to taking a look at them. All right. I'm going to check the chat one more time. And moderators, if you don't mind checking if I'm missing anything. All right. So this is really important because this is something that I find really deters people from being a successful gardener. A lot of these plant packets should have, and I'm going to hold this up. I don't know if you guys can see. Give me a thumbs up or thumbs down. I can't really see you guys. So see. So it should have like the seasonality of plants. So this gives you, oh, questions are in the Q&A, not in the chat. Okay, 1 second. Sorry about that, guys. Oh, okay. So I have a couple of questions. So I'm going to ask the question and then answer it live. So Judy had a question called, how long do you need to root a plant? It really depends. So on rooting a plant, what I like to do is if I were to root a plant, I'm wondering if I could do it. I'll do it in a second. But if I were to take a cutting of a plant, you're going to want to get a node or a little nodule. You're going to fill this up with water and you're going to wait until you have enough roots. So you don't need the roots to entirely fill up the jar, but just enough to where you see that the plant can survive. And what you can do, Judy, is I would take 2 cuttings, which is what I typically do. And then if I think I'm ready, I'll take the first one and see how it does. And then I'll wait a week or 2 later and then do the second one and see how it does. So you can kind of experiment and figure it out. Some plants are easier than others, frankly, and they all have their own way of existing and rooting. And then, yeah, someone mentioned that other plants like woody stock plants like damp sand. Yes, that is a whole other class. We're going to try to focus on beginner stuff, and then maybe we can add like more intermediate and advanced lessons towards the end, if that's okay with you. And then maybe you guys can give me some feedback. Okay. So let me go back to sharing. I don't see anything else. Thank you so much for those questions. It's awesome. All right. So I'm going to go back to seasonality because this is so important. So seeds are programmed by nature to know when they wake up, right? So there's a kid's book called A Seed is Sleepy, and it really talks about how the seeds know when it's time to wake up. So some seeds, especially with California natives, they like their winter time, or they like to have a certain amount of water before they wake up. So same is true for winter plants and for summer plants. So like tomatoes, you could get a tomato to sprout indoors with like a heat mat, maybe in a time when it's not winter. So you could grow tomatoes theoretically indoors. A lot of people do it with like aquaponics or with heat lamps or with direct lights and grow facilities, right? But if you're going to transplant to the outside, you need to make sure that the temperature and the plant match. So for tomatoes, like right now is a good time. These, my friend Justin started for me. And these are cool. You can check out the roots here. So these are ready to transplant. The root system's looking good. They're not root bound. And what I mean by root bound, sometimes when a plant has been sitting in a nursery for a long time, they start kind of tangling. And I used to think that it was like a really good quality, that it had really strong roots. But what that means is that, you know, you're going to have to loosen up the plants quite a bit, the roots. So I like to find something that's a little bit less established, that can kind of grow and stretch itself out when I plant it in the raised beds that I'll be transplanting this to. So since a lot of us are doing tomatoes, I'm going to give you a quick tip. I'm not going to focus too much on it, but just enough. I like to take the bottom branches and leaves off and probably plant it about this high. Tomatoes are going to carry a lot of fruit, and these will eventually turn into roots. So I like to bury them a little bit deeper. So probably about this high would be fine. I mean, you could do it down here, but I would recommend over here. And then tomatoes grow very, very big. So I wouldn't want to keep them here very long. I also wouldn't want to keep them in something like this very long. I typically go like 15 gallons or more for tomatoes if I'm going to do them in a container. And then with tomatoes, we don't want to overwater them. So we water them, we make sure that they're consistently moist, and then we start cutting the water. I like to water my tomatoes probably once a week once they're established. sometimes twice a week if I know it's going to be very dry, but in a pot, usually it can retain a lot of the water. And if I'm going to use a clay pot or a terracotta pot, the clay will suck out the water. Whereas a plastic one might not necessarily do that. The terracotta will absorb water, so you got to kind of keep an eye on that. And while we're talking about watering and seasonality, one way to check plants to see if they're moist isn't necessarily by sight. It's more so by looking and sticking your finger on it, in it. So this is my digital moisture meter. So I stick my finger about a knuckle deep, and if it feels wet, then I don't water it again. And again, this depends on the plant, right? Some like it much drier, and it depends on your soil, on the type of soil that the plant requires. So these are all things to take into account. So just like we can grow tomatoes at all times, let's think about lettuce. Lettuce and cilantro typically do better when it's like fall, winter, spring. For me here in Burbank, if you're in another area, it might be different. Or if you can maximize your microclimate, it might be different. Some people grow things year round. That's great. But you might want to check out, like, why is my lettuce bolting? It's not in direct light. But you got to take into account the atmospheric conditions. What is the weather like? What does the air feel like? Because what the lettuce will do is say, you know what, this isn't for me, and it will bolt and it will go to seed and it'll taste bitter. So I would really advise on keeping a garden journal, which is like one of my favorite hobbies and favorite things to teach about, because a garden journal will allow us to take notes. It's your garden diary, right? So you can write when you planted, how much you watered, what your yield was. And what I like to use it for is like my failures, honestly. It's like much like writing about like when you dated and all your heartbreaks, like you can do that with plants too and get very emotional, because when we lose a plant that you cared about, oof, catastrophic. So what I like to do is like, I grew this, I planted it at this time, I overwatered it and it died. What is plan B? Or what will I do next season? Or am I willing to expand what I'm growing? Could I also rotate the soil? Because, tomatoes are heavy feeders. So we can't keep growing tomatoes over and over and over in the soil and expect the soil to keep feeding us, right? So much land loss and farm loss has been attributed to not knowing how to take care of the soil and how to generate the soil for nutrients. So if we're going to keep planting stuff for a long time, how are we feeding it? And so that applies not just to farms, it applies to our pots. After a while, we're going to have to keep nutrients in the pots because the roots can't spread out and kind of suck in all that nutrition or the minerals to make their own nutrients, right? So what I like to use, and I really am an organic gardener, I don't like to use too many store-bought things or too many amendments, because sometimes we get carried away and our leaves turn yellow and it's like, wait, I over fertilized. So I like to get some worm compost or some compost from my bin. The Burbank Recycle Center has been so generous in their organics education. And there's a lot of gardeners who breed worms here. So if you guys need worms, you let me know, we'll get them to you. But understanding seasonality and the impacts of what you can grow when is great. If you guys are more advanced, my friend Fang is part of like the rare fruit growers, and he swears that he can grow anything at any time. And he really can. He's doing fantastic stuff. Same with his neighbor, Maria, who's become a good friend, and I really like her. They're great gardeners, and they're really able to create these microclimates to grow more things year round that like I normally wouldn't think could be done. All right, I'm going to check questions again. 1 second. Okay. All right, so this So good question, Brenda. I'm going to go to some questions that are coming in. So Brenda asked, should the soil be packed or loose for planting tomatoes? It depends. I don't know exactly what your soil looks like, Brenda, but what I like to do, if I have garden soil, I like to pack it snugly. I know that's kind of like not what you asked, but I like to like pack it a little bit, but not too much, because we have to remember that soil has to have, it's a balance of organic matter and water and air, because we need the roots to be able to move freely, right? So I would say just get it nice and snug and not pack it too tight, but not too loose. Now this would be different for something like a tree. I've seen trees planted very shallow, like more than is recommended, and then packed tightly or packed too loosely. So you have to kind of understand what type of plant, whereas something like indoor could be a little bit more loosely packed. Oh, okay. Hi, Linda. Linda has a great question. Okay, so Linda said, for those of us that don't compost and can't, what are other fertilizers we can use? Okay, so I am going to go straight into fertilizers because I think that's a really important question. Beth, I see your question and it's really funny, and I will help you in a second. So let's go. See, Beth, your watering question is going to come up next. All right, so let's look at NPK. So this is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So these are the macronutrients that plants need to survive. There's macro and there's micronutrients. So most fertilizers at the store will have 3 numbers. It'll say like 555 or 15-15-15 or like 1-1-1 slow release fertilizer. So there's a lot of great organic fertilizers on the market. I would just make sure that they're like either, I don't know, usually the nursery folks could tell you, but I tend to like Dr. Earth's because it's non-toxic to children or animals, and you never know, especially if you're like me and you're growing stuff at schools. So the nitrogen is for the foliage, for the greening of the leaves. Phosphorus helps the roots, right? And potassium promotes all around well-being, as you can see there. So one problem is that I find we often have too much nitrogen. And I've been guilty of it. I've pumped so much nitrogen into the tomato plant, and then I get really, really excited because my tomato plant is huge and very green, but it never pushes out the flowers or the fruit. So just be cognizant of how much you're applying and when. For fertilizers, more is not necessarily better. More sometimes can kill things. I don't know if you guys have grass, but if you over fertilize, if you put too much nitrogen, you could really burn it. Same thing for chicken manure. If you're utilizing chicken manure in your raised beds, you want to make sure that you're working it in very deeply and you're rotating it, because if you leave it right on top, it's going to burn your plants and it's really going to mess things up. Eventually it won't, you know, but make sure that you're working things in and follow directions. I say that obviously follow directions, but I've screwed it up so bad. Like I've said, oh, I know what I'm doing. And I got this like overconfident like air about me. And then I really, really destroyed my grass. So that's a personal story. And I'm glad my husband can't hear because it was very expensive to lay down sod. All right. So the other thing I wanted to talk about is the composition of soil. This pie chart is so important, and I think it's good to go back to basics. Plants need water, but not too much water, and plants need space for air. Sometimes people want to rototill their front yard, and the problem isn't so much like that it's so compacted. It's like, well, what got us here? And how do we fix it in a way that like will promote like soil resilience and longevity? So mulching is really good. I think that retains water. You can always ask people for compost. People are so willing to make trades. You can try to buy amendments. You can buy organic amendments. Worm casings are also, you can purchase those at nurseries. So that's also an option. All right. So I'm going to go back to watering because this is so important. And we're ahead of schedule, so this is really great. So for watering, more is not better necessarily. What I would say is like, wait for things to dry out. And sometimes, I don't know about you guys, but if you've ever had like a boyfriend who you've loved a little too much, I feel like we could compare it to that. Pouring more love into it isn't necessarily going to help sometimes, right? So for watering, I would just really, really be aware of like what the regular watering schedule means and write it down in your garden journal. I'm going to keep saying that. So for this one, I know I watered it 3 or 4 days ago. It still feels great. For this one, and I'll show you my mistake. I don't know if you could see it. Oh, my computer's going to get very, very dirty. Okay. So I got a cheaper soil because sometimes it can get very expensive to garden. I try not to do that. And so for this, do you guys see the wood chips in here? So wood chips are great because they will break down over time and provide nitrogen. But sometimes while they're breaking down, they can actually pull nitrogen away from your plants, which can cause a lot of damage. I did this to one of my Meyer lemon trees and I almost killed it. I've killed a lime tree because I mulched it just at a time when the tree was just too young to handle it. I think the mulch was just not the right time, not the right place. But for this plant is very, very dry. And the soil is very woody. So I think at some point I'm also going to have to amend it with like a nicer, softer potting soil and maybe work that in a little or repot. Typically, when I planted this, the pot was too big for the plant, and I'll show you why. I'm going to pull this out since we have time. This is great. So this I got from a cutting, right? So this is what the root system looks like. I don't know if you guys can see it. Can you see it? All right. So this is the root system. This was the cutting. The roots are coming in through the side. So this pot was initially a little too big for this plant, and it can really waterlog the plant. So just what I should have done was planted in something a little smaller, so then the roots wouldn't have been waterlogged. And so a lot of plants can be affected by that. A lot of plants don't like to have wet feet, as they say. So there's that. And then this one is my basil. This one has like a nicer, richer soil. I amended that with worm casings. This is very wet, so I'm probably not going to water for a while. With basil, you're going to want to keep it a little bit moist. All right, I am going to stop the share for now. And then I'm going to go through some of the Q&As and maybe we can like work on some back and forth together. All right. Linda, I hope I answered your question on that. All right, I have a lot of leftover old Miracle Grow fertilizer. Can I just mix it with water and spray the larger vegetable garden? I don't know. I don't really touch that stuff. I don't know what's in there, to be frank, and I don't find that brand really is that transparent. So I'm sorry. I would just start composting, start trading some. I don't think you need all that stuff, honestly. But maybe if you stay after, we can connect, and then you can show me what you have, and then we can talk about it. All right. So is the weather in Los Angeles cold enough to kill a plant that likes warm weather, or would it really only die in freezing temperatures? Oh, that's a really good question, Aubrey. Okay, so the weather in Los Angeles can really kill plants. If you have a baby mango or a baby banana or something that's used to like, I guess, growing up in the tropical rainforest that has like a temperate climate, cold weather could definitely kill it. I had a friend who lost a papaya plant, 2 papaya trees. I've lost banana trees because I thought they were able to withstand the cold weather. And Burbank gets cold. It gets a little colder than LA. So I don't know if you guys have heard plant after frost date. So typically what's recommended is that you start planting March, April, because that will guarantee that we're past like the coldest temperatures. But so that's one answer, right? It really depends on the plant. The second answer is some trees require chill hours. So if you require chill hours, you need to hit a temperature, I believe it's between 32 and 45 degrees in order for the tree to set fruit. So that would be like apples, pears, plums, things like that. So you want to get a variety that will work in your local climate, in your local area. I would recommend a couple of sources. One is the Sunset Western Garden Book. It's like the Gardener's Bible. That one's really good. If you look up like UCANR resources, there's usually some troubleshooting tips there. And I think those are reputable sources. And then you'll learn your zone. So then it'll tell you what you can grow when. And then when you buy seeds, just make sure they're compatible with your area. One thing that's interesting is some plants can be perennials in another place, like on the East Coast, and only annuals here, meaning perennials will continue to grow, whereas annuals have a one and done season and it's over. I hope that answered it. Okay. Sarah, if you find the secret to keeping critters from eating plants, you'll win the lottery. You'll be a millionaire. It's really hard in Burbank. A lot of people build cages to keep critters out of their plants or out of their garden. That seems to help. We have possums here and squirrels, and I'm watching one squirrel go into my avocado tree right now, and it's really taking a lot of restraint to sit here. We have a dog, and that seems to scare a few things off. We also have a cat, and that seems to help. But I've kind of given up on trying to be angry with those animals because I'm not going to win. Nature always wins. So I try to grow a little extra so I'm not as heartbroken. One thing that has worked for me has been to use the blueberry cages and the strawberry cages that I find from the grocery store. And then if it's like a peach, I can just use the clamshells. And I've also asked like the local neighborhood groups to just drop them off at my porch. And people are so willing to like just give those to you because they know they're not really getting recycled. So yeah. And then for larger critters, I think people use like the gopher netting underneath, and that seems to help. But I would just join your local gardening groups and kind of talk it out, because there might be a person or two on your block who might have found the solution. Same with mice. Mice are a problem here. All right. Okay. I'm interested in growing herbs outdoors in containers. Are herbs easy to start by seeds or cuttings or plants from the nursery? Interested in parsley, basil, rosemary, cilantro. Awesome question. This is so cool. I'm really loving the questions, guys. They're really amazing. Okay. So I find that you can do a mix. So what I do in my client gardens is I tend to buy a starter plant. So I'll buy like a little basil plant, and then I will sow seeds behind it. So then you have something to show right now. So you get your instant gratification fix. And then you plant a few more seeds behind there. And so they'll continue to come up. With cilantro, this is a really, really great method because cilantro, you can continue to harvest it. So right now, I think if you have shady areas, you're able to grow parsley. Basil is good right now too. Rosemary can withstand the heat, so you're good there. Cilantro likes a milder weather. The problem with cilantro is we often think of salsa gardens and we think it'll grow when tomatoes and jalapenos grow. And usually by now the cilantro is bolting. So I would start that one in the fall or in the winter, typically in the fall. And yes, I think that all of the items that you listed, Michelle, are like great container garden plants. So what I would do is like set up a theme, and you can make it fancy, call it like Michelle's herb garden or Michelle's culinary garden or your herbs de Provence garden, and just make a list of the things you want to buy at the nursery, order a few things for seeds, and then try both methods and see which one you like better. I really like growing from seed. It gives me like some weird, nutty, like satisfaction that it's like, oh, yes, I got it to grow. But some people don't have the patience for it, and that's okay. So if you are like, no, I want it done, I only have 2 hours, like, let's get it done, great, that works. But I find that if you have kids too, give them a couple of pots and have them experiment with seeds, or nieces or nephews or neighbors, because it's really good for kids to see like roots growing in, stems coming up, leaves, and then you start kind of like enjoying gardening and enjoying nature from this like really cool childlike perspective. So yeah. All right. Let's see. Oh, Beth, that's a great question. Do you water until the soil comes out from the bottom? Yes. So I'm going to get some water and I'm going to go off screen for a second and I'm going to show you how I water. Give me 1 second. So there's different methods. Here's one I like. This works for me in my sink. So I tend to like water from the top down. I wait till the water runs through. I don't know if you can see it. Then I'm going to give it a little bit to just kind of sit, usually in the sink. And then after the water really penetrates the soil, I'll give it a few minutes. So let's put this away for now. And then in a few minutes, I'll water it again. So I'm going to do it twice because the first time the water's going to run through immediately. So the second time, I think some of the initial water absorbed and there's more space and it can absorb more water. So that's one of my tips. Another one, some indoor plants I still struggle with. So some of them I water from the bottom if the root system is more established. That won't work if the roots are very shallow. So that's something we can try too. All right. Oh, Judy, let's see. What is the best way to maintain air in the soil of a plant? Great question. So I would say organic matter. As organic matter decomposes, you're going to get a lot of like beneficial bacteria, a lot of really great decomposers, a lot of insects. And I think we're so detached from nature sometimes, like buying our food from the grocery store, that we don't understand there's like really beneficial bacteria in there. So I would just make sure that you're adding organic matter in there. You can replenish the soil. You can even add, what I would recommend in Burbank is to make sure you get like straw to retain the moisture and not go through so much water. Sometimes we think because it's hot outside that we need to keep giving it water, and that might not necessarily be the case. So just, I would layer a, if you go to Tricky Track or something like that, you can ask for gardening straw, and then you just layer that in. So that'll retain the moisture. So that's a good way to keep water and air in there. Adding organic matter would be another way. And then you'll get beneficial critters in there. And then let's see what else. Oh yeah, anonymous attendee. All right. So do you have any advice for the days of excessive heat we get a few times a year? Everything will be growing fine, but then we get those days in the 110. I've lost more than a few zone 10 plants. Yeah. So this is tough. And I think with global warming, we're expecting a lot of our plants, some plants could potentially become extinct. So when we talk about global warming, it's not just like our impacts to like, changes in weather, but what will it mean to some plants that are very delicate, some of our herbaceous plants? If we're looking at our own backyard, what I would say is like save crappy old shirts, ask for sheets. You can only do so much. When the atmospheric heat goes that high, there's really not much you can do. Even if you keep the roots cool and you shade it, it's still ongoing. I mean, I've seen some people go as crazy as like turning fans on or putting ice in front of the fan to keep it cool. But it really, for me, I just don't have time for that. So if it's a plant I really care about that's delicate, like I had a baby avocado. There's no way it could have survived. So I brought it inside on those like high heat days. For trees that are a little bit more established, I accept that I'm going to lose some of the canopy on the trees. On plants that are more delicate, I either bring them inside or, it sucks, but this is something that farmers have to deal with, right? So it's like they might lose your yield. So it's kind of just like accepting it and moving on and starting over. I know a couple of years ago we had those days when it was like 100 and 14. And, a lot of us lost a lot of plants, and all we did was like shade the plants, try our best and move on, because at that point they just die. There's just not much we could do. But I would just recommend like going to yard sales, getting those sheets, looking like a crazy person, putting them up at night, and then just bringing them down when you can. What I would advise against is please do not water when it is hot. You don't want your trees or your plants to really be taking in water at that point. So I would check the temperature and kind of mark on your calendar when it'll be really, really hot, and then deep water your trees like 3 days back, or water your plants a few days back. If it's something that's more delicate, what you could do is really play with microclimates and set up a taller plant that can withstand heat, and put a more vulnerable plant underneath it. So you create this makeshift canopy, and you could do it with a lot of things. I was able to extend the life of my lettuce an extra week or two by putting bigger plants. In school gardens, I use sunflower, big giant teddy bear sunflowers to shield some of the more delicate plants from the heat. So I would use trellises. I would use anything structural to just provide some shade. Okay. Myron, I can't really compost. I keep a 5-gallon bucket with a lid. I throw in veggie scraps, coffee and tea grounds in, and fill it with water. I use the water to water plants and start over every 10 days with new peels and water. I don't know if the plants get too much or too little nutrients. Myron, I find that a lot of these, like, I don't know if it's like TikTok videos or like these Instagram videos that are like, oh, you just mush in a banana. And I don't think decomposition works that fast. I really don't think that the banana will release all the potassium into the water like that. And I say that with like a very basic knowledge of chemistry. So if you're like an advanced chemist, you would know more than I do. But what I would recommend, if you don't have space for that, but you have a 5-gallon bucket, I would do some worm composting, because you'll see when the food has completely decomposed, and you can keep it in a very small container, and then you fill it up and then you're done. You can even do like a couple of the plastic shoe boxes, and you can get those for free. I don't know that the water experiment really works. I would really need to see more data around that. I think it's like it's a cute video. I know when I've used bananas, I just put them straight into the soil and wait for them to decompose. But I would have to get back to you on that. I'm not an expert on that. I just don't think the decomposition works that fast, if that's helpful. Sorry. Let's see. Oh, Linda, you said parsley likes shade. What about oregano and basil? Oregano, they're delicate. So I would say it'll do fine on the milder, like spring and summer days, but it will bolt. So basil, when it gets too hot, it bolts. So, but I find that you can grow basil a few times a year. So it would be okay in the maybe spring, beginning of summer, and sometimes even fall. If you get different varieties of basil, like Thai basil, I think those, the life of that type of basil can be extended. Oregano, same thing with oregano, I think can withstand a little bit more heat. Parsley can handle full sun, I would say in the spring. Really play with it. There are some, if you go to some specialty seed places in California, I think San Diego Seed Company might have things that can handle a little bit more of the heat. So yeah, I think that's great. Yes, Aubrey. So I'm so glad that you like the statement about kids. I think that kids get like, gardens are like seen as this like beautiful thing that should be maintained and kids can't go in there. And there's like been such a good change in movements from in kids education and kids learning to be more about exploration. So if you really like something meticulous, great, but give your kid like a nice big space to get messy, because that would be so great. You can teach so many science lessons. So I'm a garden teacher for LAUSD, and I find that so many of the kids learn chemistry and learn earth science through getting their hands dirty. And I'm talking like ETK through like 5th grade. So yes, I would say for little kids, like toddlers, I would do a bigger seed so they can work on their dexterity. Faba beans are really great. We might be past that season. Faba beans, nasturtiums, beans in general are great. And that way they can count and start moving them around. Rachel, you have a question about earth box. My friend Joanne at Two Dog Nursery swears by those. I don't want to spend that much money on a plastic container. I'm really trying to get away from plastic. So for me, it's like a personal thing. If you find that it works for you, great. They're a little pricey, so I try not to point people towards things that are like costly. But you can try it. I had a self-watering container that my friend Lucy gave me once, and I liked it fine. It's plastic, so I couldn't really leave it out in the sun, and it kind of defeated the whole purpose for me. So it really depends where you're going to set it up at. Okay. Oh, this is another great question. Seeds past the expiration date. So you can do a couple of things. You can test and see if they germinate. So most seed companies will run a test and say, okay, this had a 97% germination rate. If you order from like Baker Seeds, which is I think rareseeds.com, and they have a low germination rate, they'll usually put a sticker and say overpacked seeds based on low germination rates. So that's good. But I think the germination rate, so the seed actually sprouting might lower, but under optimal conditions or good conditions, you can get seeds to come back. I would just keep them in a shady place. And what I tend to do with those are like my exploratory seeds, and I give those to kids to plant, because if they take, great. If they don't, well, they're older, and you can sprout 10-year-old seeds. They've been finding like palm trees in Israel that are like 10,000 years old. I mean, given those are grown in labs under optimal conditions, but you can make the most of them. I don't think that you have to give them away after it says it's expired. I have seeds that are 3 or 4 years, and I use those for the school gardens. For like the fresher stuff that I need for clients, then I will get newer seeds, so I can be sure that they'll work out just fine. But I think they're fine. I mean, as long as they weren't like out in the sun forever, but you can try it. There's no sense in throwing them out. All right. Does straw go on top as mulch or mixed in with soil? Oh, great question. That just goes on top. So the point is to maintain the moisture in the soil, you're going to add a layer of straw. And what that does is you want to get the soil wet first. So you want to saturate the soil and then you add that. So it's very helpful with drip irrigation systems, because then you're not losing so much water due to evaporation, if that makes sense. Oh, yes, Phyllis. Such a good question. That is a whole other class. And Craig and I taught a 4-class worm composting class, but I'll talk about it a little bit. So composting worms are amazing. They are like wonderful. You can keep a plastic container with a lid. I would go a little deeper than this one. Like those shoe storage containers, or you can even use the packing boxes. You can put worms in there with bedding, some newspaper, some carbon, so some browns, and then you throw in some of your food scraps. So nothing cooked, no meat, no dairy, no citrus, no onions. But I tend to put like banana peels, apple cores in there, and they eat that stuff. And you can add an additional layer too once you're done with that. Then you harvest all of their casings. It sounds gross, but I promise you, once you get like good results from their casings and from the soil and from the amendments, you will think these guys are your best friends. And then you just scoop out their poop and you throw it in your garden and it's great. Some people make worm tea, so they like mix it up with water, add the casings. I generally don't have time. If I did, I probably would do it, but I just mix it in with soil. I think they're wonderful. It really is a combination of like macronutrients, micronutrients. Okay. Jennifer, great question. What is the best soil for starting seeds? Everyone has their own formula. What I did this time around, I bought Kellogg's before, and I've been gifted Kellogg's soil at schools. With that said, they're very generous to the community. They give us a lot of free soil for schools when we request it, and they really care about the community. I think that soil is great for established plants. What I tend to do is get like a soil that can retain moisture. So I will use a potting mix and then add in a little bit of peat moss or coconut coir. I think peat moss might be mined a little bit too excessively right now. So I use coconut coir. I soak it up and then I mix it with the soil, and that usually retains moisture, and it's a better medium for sprouting seeds. And now I'm talking about like herbs and edibles and plants. For natives, that's a completely different soil for that. So native seeds can be very technical in the way you can get them to sprout. They need very specific conditions. They need to be winterized. I'm not an expert on that, but cactus also, you need a better draining soil for that. So you just have to know what you're growing and then separate it. Someone asked a question about succulents. When could we talk about that? Not an expert on that, but I do have a few succulents. What I would do is just make sure that you're not overwatering. I think succulents, I've been told like, oh, you can't kill a succulent. That's wrong. You absolutely can kill a succulent, and I'm an expert at that. What I would do is make sure that you're not like giving it full blown heat. Just because they can withstand heat doesn't mean that they're going to like direct light. They'll still burn. And make sure that you have the right conditions. A mistake I see around Burbank is that people will put like a drought tolerant plant next to grasses that are on sprinklers. So just make sure that I feel like I'm introducing a lot of concepts, so I hope you guys are hungry for more stuff after and we can do more classes. But hydrozoning is like, you want to plant things that are compatible with each other. So you don't want to plant a banana that is from the tropics right next to a moringa tree that comes from a very dry region. And if you do, like, you definitely don't want them both on a sprinkler system next to grass, because they have different water needs and different conditions. So I don't know if that's thorough enough for succulents, but I just want to get through the questions. What is the best way to remove weeds between concrete when the root is too tough to pull out and non-toxic to pets? Avril, great question. Please, please, please do not use Roundup. We are so not down with that going into our water and soil systems. So what my friends at the nursery, I think it's called Hahamunga or Huhamunga. It's a watershed in Pasadena. It's super cool nursery. I really want everyone to visit it. Please check it out. They take boiling water. So I do a lot of hand weeding, and I'm always in my front yard. My neighbor Brenda's here, and she's always seeing me outside. I get what you mean, where it's like the root is too deep to pull out. I would boil water and pour water on it. That should kill it without introducing any toxics into the soil. All of the stuff that you put into the soil will eventually make it down into the watershed. So we want to know that everything has, like, it's all part of the cycle of life. That was a really good question. All right. Ooh, you guys are really making me work today. I thought we were going to talk about like begonias and roses and call it a day. Let's see. All right. Oh, why no onions? Myron, I think this was in relation to what you can put in a compost. I think so there's like the traditional above ground compost and trenching compost. There's a lot of different methods. The worms tend to be a little bit sensitive, so they don't like the temperature going above 85. And there's a few things that they don't like. They won't touch citrus and they won't touch onions for whatever reason. I've snuck one or two in and it's fine, but it won't really break down. They won't eat it. So in a worm bin, you're not really counting on the decomposition of the food decomposing all the way down to 0. You're counting on like the food decomposing and the worms eating it. But the onions kind of just sit there and rot. I really like to take my food waste, freeze it in the freezer, and then on hot days with a lid, right? I'm not trying to make it all gross in my kitchen. But what I do is I take that frozen chunk, I make like a little like area, and then I put the frozen stuff in there. Worms don't like to freeze to death, but when it's hot, the food will decompose, the cellular walls will break down, and then it'll bring down the overall temperature of the worm bin. So that's one way to keep them alive through the summer. With regular composting, you don't want to invite critters. You know, there's a lot of critters in Burbank. So you don't want to put meat or dairy because you don't want to invite, you're going to get like creepy crawlers, like the decomposers of the world, the little roly-polies, things like that. But you don't want to invite like a whole family of like possums to move in. They have the right to exist, but I really don't want them in my compost going crazy. All right. So one question, do you know which plants do not grow well together? I wish I had a short answer for that, but what I would do is I would figure out, so a couple of things. You could talk about hydrozoning. So it's like what water needs are similar. So that could be one. Another one would be like look up companion planting, and companion planting talks more about edibles. So what can grow well. So if you guys don't know, like some plants can really inhibit the growth of another plant. So you don't want to plant like non-compatible plants together. So I would recommend just like looking up companion planting. Some of them are very beneficial because they keep bad guys away, bad insects. Marigolds are really great plant to have throughout your garden. They're not just Dia de los Muertos plant, but they're really, really great for your garden because it keeps some pests away. Same with basil. So those are good plants that grow well together. Some plants that do not grow well together, I think some onions can inhibit the growth of other plants. And then you also want to rotate the plants that you have. So on a larger scale, on a macro scale, cotton has drained soils. So farmers will keep moving west because historically they haven't known how to like take care of their soil. So we've been sold this story about George Washington Carver being a peanut farmer, but he was just so much more significant than that. He really was teaching farmers in the South like how to take care of their soil and how to regenerate the soil using these very great organic methods and using cover crops like peanuts to really get the nitrogen back in the soil. So that's he's my favorite. All right. Let's see. What plants can I add besides marigolds that will help deter pests? You know, off the top of my head, things are not ringing a bell. It'll come back to me once we get off this. But what I would recommend, Diana, is to grow things far enough apart from each other and have enough space to move around the pot or the raised bed or your garden so that you can see pests at all angles. So sometimes what I do it when I'm careless is I grow too many things too closely. I can get a little bit sloppy at the school because I'll let a lot of kids plant in one area. And before I know it, I don't just have aphids on one plant, I have aphids on a lot. So what I would recommend is like be able to get around all sides of a plant. And when you examine it, don't just look at the top of the plant, but really lift up the leaves and look into the new buds, because that's usually what the aphids like. And I don't just mean aphids for like edibles. Like I have a white sage that is beautiful, and the aphids are really attacking the new buds. Okay. And there's really, a white sage does not like a lot of water. It's a very drought tolerant plant. So I don't want to water them off. So what I do is I just kind of go out there and I just start squishing them. If you have more space, nature has a way of controlling. So readjusting, right? So if you have enough pests, the birds will come and eat the caterpillars. I've been seeing a lot of the sparrows doing my work and really taking care of the aphids. And then if you really have a lot of aphids, the ladybugs will come next. And it is just amazing to see them breed, because they are just so funny, and they just come in and they're like, I'm moving in and I'm giving you a ton of babies. And you can't even imagine how cool it is not to spend $14.99 at Armstrong buying ladybugs. So just make sure that you're checking under the leaf and checking in there. But birds are really great at taking care of the big caterpillars. And then also check for grubs in the soil. That's one thing that I didn't touch upon. There's a lot of pests. And they're like these like fat little white worms. You can just use your hands to dig those out. You can either get rid of them or feed them to chickens or leave them out for the birds, but those guys go after roots big time. All right. Borage with tomato plants minimizes the tomato bugs. The question is, I understand that borage or borage, I always get it wrong with the pronunciation. It minimizes the tomato bugs. I grow that and I still get tomato bugs. It could potentially, if you've had success with it, you would know. I would say go for it. I find that a lot of the master gardeners, like we get a lot of like the technical knowledge and science knowledge, but the more I learn, the more I realize, like, if it works in your garden, do it. It might not work for me. It might not work in a lab setting. It might not work for someone who's getting a thesis on it, or writing a thesis on it. But if it works, go for it, because I think lived experience is so important. Let's see. I keep killing my rosemary when it's in a pot. I think you're overwatering it. Rosemary should be relatively drought tolerant, and check the schedule on how much you're watering it. And I would say keep a watering log on that. And, add it to your Google Calendar too. Send reminders to yourself. I would say, like, gardening is supposed to be relaxing. So I hate to like burden you guys with like saying, schedule this, schedule that, don't do this. But, I think if you start logging, you'll see like how much is too much water, and start quantifying that. If you're on a drip system, the drip irrigation should be controlled. It's a lot less water, but I find that with COVID, I got bored and then I'd water my plants. Or I'm like, oh, well, I'm working from home. This needs water again. And it's like, wait a minute, just because I'm home 5 days a week does not mean my plant needs water 5 days a week. And then I got those nasty little like gnats that hang out in the house. And that was nature's way of telling me, like, your soil is about to stink. It's about to get anaerobic. So what I would say when you're watering the rosemary, are you getting those little gnats? I don't know if you want to like respond in the Q&A. I don't know if you're getting the gnats, or if your soil is getting stinky. If it's stinky, it's starting to get anaerobic, and those are like the effects of root rot. The other thing you can do to analyze if the rosemary is dying or not is pull the rosemary out and see what the root system looks like. If it's mushy or black or like squishy and it doesn't really look like roots anymore, that would be a good way to determine if it's root rot. The other one is, do you have any recommendations for where to get quality soil package free in our area? Would love to bring my own bag and fill up based on how much I need, since I'm in a small apartment and can't spare space for extra bags of soil. That's a good question. I do know that Soil and Sod Depot locally will deliver big deliveries of soil, but I don't know about free and small containers. One thing I saw the Woodbury students do up the street is that they pitch in for a bag and they split it up. Also, I've seen people in the Buy Nothing groups ask for just this much soil, and usually someone will say, yeah, I have that much, or no, I don't, but maybe we can split a bag. So I would really like advocate to like building community around plants. I think it's kept a lot of us sane. And I think that's why plants got so popular. It gave us something to like think about and care about during this time that was so difficult for so many of us. And it's built a lot of community locally because you're able to trade food and you're able to have some resilience, just like our plants do. So I don't know. I would say just like try to ask someone, you know, for it for free or split a bag. And then another question was, what foods can you grow in containers? I think I missed most of that question. I think you meant like a climbing. Passion fruit grows well, grapes. Those could grow well in containers, larger containers though. So just be aware of like the final size that it'll get to. So like even, you can get a semi-dwarf Meyer lemon that can stay 2 to 4 feet. I don't know if that was the question, but, let's see. I guess all of you guys are having a hard time with, aphids. And I think that's very normal. The little black specks might be poop from a caterpillar. I would lift up the leaf and check the back, because I think you might have a caterpillar climbing on it. And they'll be very, very small till they get really fat. So really look carefully under like bright light, and you'll see that they're tiny, tiny worms, and then they can grow very big. I've found very big caterpillars because I couldn't see them initially. So keep an eye out for that. One thing I want to say about sprays and pesticides that I don't think I really learned, once you start using them, it's hard to claw back at them. So I use neem as a last resort for organic gardening. It's considered organic, but neem will kill everything. Pesticides don't really say, okay, I'll only kill aphids. And we're having like, I think we're having a hard time this year with monarchs. The bees, always, we want to protect them, right? So I would say like really get used to squishing aphids and hosing them off with a little bit of soap and water. That usually tends to do it. But it's a lot of like spending time in your garden and seeing what's healthy and what's not. I'm not anti-neem, but I find that once it's time to call in the neem, it's also time to pull out the plant. Like I have some kale that has seen better days. I'm probably going to pull it out rather than keep treating it with neem, because you can't really eat it for 2 days afterwards after you spray with neem. So I might pull those out, and that might be chicken food. And then hopefully it doesn't spread to other things. So why I say give things space to grow is not just so they reach their maximum potential, but also so the plants aren't jumping from, the insects aren't jumping from plant to plant. This is a very important lesson for tomatoes. I've grown tomatoes for production. So I've really wanted to pack in the varieties in the tomatoes. And we got a really great yield, and we were able to can them. We were able to make sun-dried tomatoes, all kinds of cool stuff. But the tomato, I think tomato bugs or hornworms or something like that, they look funky. They have a little horn. It was really hard to find them. And then finally, when we did, we had to spray, and it just really, it really dried out a lot of the insects. So it wasn't just the bad insect that we went after. It really got some of the good guys too. I think it took out a couple of the praying mantises, which really hurt my heart, because those guys are great at controlling bad insect population. So just bear in mind that, you know, you could do it, just keeping an eye on things. All right. 1 second. So there's stuff that like I want to get to and we won't have time because it's like a whole like side quest. Like roses are a big side quest. What I would say for the roses questions, I'm not an expert on that. I can prune them and I can maintain them. Just make sure that the soil pH is appropriate. and that the watering methods are appropriate. But there's a couple of ladies in the Burbank Backyard Food Growers group who are truly rose experts. So if you ask in there, they might be able to give you a more thorough question. And if you want to stay back, I might be able to point you towards some resources. Oh, so plumerias can get very big. So one thing that you could do with that is keep it in a larger container and have it grow into it, or you can just size up slowly. So one mistake I see is that you want it to get to the final form, right? So you want it to get super big, so you buy a big container. Sometimes when that happens, the roots might get waterlogged. So I would just say like do a gradual increase in size. So I'm not saying like every 3 months, but just like be moderate in how big you go up, because I've seen this happen to papayas. The roots can get really waterlogged. Yes. There is an LA compost program. Thank you for sharing that link. I really appreciate that. Someone posted LA City san.org. So that's for LA City and LA County. If you're in Burbank, we also have like the Burbank Recycle Center who has, they have a really great organics program too. If you attend a composting class, that's great. Also, there is a local composting group. There's like 10 or 12 houses that are participating in backyard composting specific to the area. The goal is to get people to walk. So you're not like turning on the car and creating more CO2 emissions just to reduce waste. So we're trying to get enough houses involved so we have a very walkable composting system locally. And then, you know, if there's enough compost, maybe you can ask for some from your neighbors, or some people have chickens. Maybe you can ask for eggs here and there. So it's a really good way to build a community and build local resiliency. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the questions. We have about 10, 15 minutes. Moderators, please jump in if I'm taking up too much time. I really want you guys to promote the library because I'm a huge fan. So if you need to jump in, let me know. So there's a question from Vivian. What is causing the white powdery mildew? I would love to diagnose just from descriptions. So please take that with a grain of salt. I've never seen your plant, right? I think overhead watering leads to a lot of powdery mildew issues, especially in squashes. So most plants like to be watered at the soil level and have the water go down. When you do overhead watering with sprinklers or with hoses, make sure you don't get it too much on the leaves. The leaves can't really absorb that. So I would check that out, and then make sure that you're watering in the morning and not in the evening. That should help. And then I'm going to water this plant. Remember, we watered it earlier. So I'm going to let the water run through one more time. Once it's done running through, I'm going to put it in its container. And remember, this one does not have a hole. So that is why I am putting this plant in here. So this will sit by my window. And then, you know, you can take cuttings and gift them once you root them. So this will get viney, and then I can plant it in here so it gets more bushy, or I can just like root it and then give it away. Okay, so I think that took care of the white mildew problem. Partial root rot and some molds can be sprayed with mixture. Yes. So Myron's addressing the problem about addressing root rot and some molds with half peroxide and water to kill the gross microbes and bacteria, remove the plant, new soil. Yes, Myron, I think that's really good. If you're experiencing root rot, you can take the plant out, either get rid of that soil or let it air dry and start with a new medium and not overwater the new plant. And then you can use fungicides if there's like a fungus or a bacterial spread. Great answer. Thank you, Myron. I appreciate the help. Okay, so I think, let's see. Watering from above in the evening, so I will try in the mornings. Yes, Vivian, you know what? I think we're all guilty of it. So just keep in mind that where is the water being absorbed? And sometimes I forget when I'm in a hurry, so don't feel bad, but try that and see if it helps. And it might not help with this plant, but it might help with future plants. And Avril had a question, which plants would you suggest to deter mosquitoes yet cannot be toxic for dogs? That's a hard question. You know, I'm growing citronella right now and I'm growing lemongrass, and they're both supposed to be for mosquitoes, but I really don't see too much of a positive effect. I think lemongrass is best used and citronella in candles or in topical things, but I really can't tell you. That is, I think you probably know more than me on that one. So if you find anything out, let me know. All right. I think we got Brenda's also. So let's see. Pumpkins, awesome. Pumpkins can be grown in containers. I would go a little larger on pumpkins, and remember, work your way back. So some winter pumpkins are actually grown in the summer. You can just harvest them in the winter, and then figure out what you're doing wrong. And, you know, back to the garden journal, back to your notes. Honestly, my cat was peeing on my pumpkin that I grew in the front, and it died. And I was like acting so shocked because I was like nursing it, but my cat was just like really peeing right on it. And it took me looking at the camera to realize like, oh, that is not a good place to plant something that's going to either be edible or decorative, because my cat's going to run all over it. So I would make sure that you're growing it in the right soil medium, that there's enough nutrients for the pumpkin, and that the seeds are viable. Sometimes the pumpkin seeds are not viable. And then just know that squashes can cross-pollinate. So you might hybridize it if you grow 2 or 3 right next to each other. All right. More info on pumpkins. How many hours of sunlight, water, soil? Oh my gosh. Linda, I am not a pumpkin expert, but I would find out what type of pumpkin you're growing. And I think you could grow it in a loamy sand. I've grown mine in just Burbank soil that's been amended with mulch for like 4 years. Nothing special, nothing fancy. But if you want something fancy, you can either buy it at a nursery and plant it in there and amend with like more potting soil, or mix in the soil in there and then, you know, add a seed or two. My pumpkins that I grew in the front are just 2 seeds in Burbank's finest soil with water every few days, and they're about this big now. I mean, not the pumpkins, but the leaf. So right now is a good time to plant pumpkins, and they're in part sun, part shade. Don't overhead water because that'll lead to mold issues. And I think that's it. I have a starter pumpkin plant. I think you're ready to go. I think you got it. All right. Did we get all of them, moderators? Myron, you know what? You're my co-host now. You're an expert. So Myron said an excellent mosquito repellent is half amber mouthwash and half water. Put it in a sprayer, safe to spray yourself, pets, and spray around your tent at camp or the patio before an evening on the patio. I never get mosquito bites. Guys, this is awesome. Thank you so much. I am happy to turn it over to Burbank's finest librarians. Thank you so much. The questions were amazing. You guys had me going, and I'm probably going to sleep really hard tonight. Thank you so much. I'm going to pass it over to you, Laura.
Okay. Thank you to our speaker. You had so much great information for us today. To Alex Arciniega for that engaging program. And thank you to all of you for your questions. When you leave this evening, you will be redirected to an evaluation form. We would really appreciate if you could fill this out, and please share any comments and ideas in the comment fields. Thank you again, and have a good evening.